Okay, and we're live. Today we're going to be joined by Bushra Malik, who is a member of the Bengalis of New York team. She started a blog called Sex in the Desh, and she is also founder of the BD Sex Education page. So now we're going to try to add her, and hopefully we can have a really fruitful conversation um, about sex education in Bangladesh. So let's add her. In the meantime, if anyone has any questions or comments or remarks about the topic at hand, please type it in the chat, and we can address it. Okay, so she joined us. Let's see if we could invite.
Hi,
Hi, Bushra. How are you?
I'm
Hope
good. I'm
you're.
sorry my camera is angled. I've been trying to fix it. I hope that's okay with everybody.
I think as long as we can understand you and read your
Oh
facial expressions,
no,
I think it's good. Yeah.
I didn't realize this was going to happen, so my apologies. This might be better because I don't want to recognize the people joining. No,
Perfect.
let me try to fix this. My apologies. What's the saying? Whatever can go wrong will
No
go wrong.
problem. Yeah.
It's
Um,
okay. I'm just gonna hold my phone up for now. It's fine.
okay, that works. Okay, awesome. So I kind of did a small introduction just to kick off before you joined. But if you want to introduce yourself in the meantime, before we get started.
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Bushra. I am a lifelong New Yorker. I was born in Bangladesh and I lived in Queens for most of my life. My day to day, I work for a city agency called New York City Emergency Management, which is a local government. We work closely with the police department, fire department, and our goal is really to protect New Yorkers and prepare them for emergencies before, during, and after they happen. I love the work that I do, but I wanted to do something that served Bangladesh and the Bangladeshi community and the Bangladeshi diaspora. So I've had this idea for a really long time, and then with some personal things that went on, and especially with COVID, I realized that it's really important for us to do what means the most to us. So I started bdsexeducation.com almost a year ago, and it launched on December 1st.
Awesome. I'm really excited to see the development of your page. For anyone who isn't familiar, please check out bdsexeducation.com. I'll type it in the comments. Um, and also check out the link in our bio, which is Bushra's latest blog post that kicks off the Sex and the Desh series that we have at Bengalis of New York. Yeah, so thank you so much for really like initiating this work. I feel like there isn't enough conversation about sex ed specifically in Bangladesh, even within the diaspora community here. It's such a taboo topic in general. So really excited that there's someone who's specifically focusing on that. If you go to Bushra's website, you'll see that most of the content or almost all of it is in Bangla. So um, is the intent for people in Bangladesh to be able to kind of develop the vocabulary and the language to actually talk about sex education with amongst themselves, with their parents, etc. What's kind of the focus on there?
Yeah, so I had quite a few people reach out to me, saying that this information should also be in English, which I definitely agree with. I think it's something that I'll create down the line. But I think as for now, especially if you're living in the United States or if you're living somewhere in the West, sex education is so readily available. I mean, if you go to any newsstand, especially if open, not to shade on any magazine, but on the cover it'll say 29 ways to, uh,
Mm-hmm.
29 ways to pleasure your man, or this is how you do this, etc. So I think there's a very sex education is very comfortable. It's every day. You see it in shows, you understand how to romance someone. Intimacy is an everyday conversation, and I think it's not something that people shy away from, which is, it's great. But that sort of information, that sort of media, that's not accessible in Bangladesh, and that's not accessible to Bangladeshis, throughout the world, right? If you're opening up a Bangladeshi newspaper, I'm sure it's not going to have ads or, any sort of adult content. And, sex education is such an everyday aspect of our life. It can impact a person from the moment that they're born to their death, right? So because it's such an everyday part of
100%.
our life, because it's such an everyday part of their life, I thought it was really integral to only have this information in Bangla because it's meant for aunties, it's meant for uncles, it's meant for our parents, it's meant
Mm-hmm.
for, people back home. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the kinds of questions that I've received. And it makes me so sad because a lot of the questions that I received from people living in Bangladesh, this is content that or questions and answers that kids here know. So when you have
Exactly.
adult males, like one of the first emails I received, I had someone ask me, "Oh, I'm getting married this weekend. How do I make sex enjoyable for my wife?" And
Wow.
that was really overwhelming because I didn't think I was going to get so many intimacy questions so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I was really sort of, because I want to also be cognizant and I want to be respectful to the Bangladeshi culture. I'm mindful of the fact that it is somewhat conservative,
Mm-hmm.
and I respect that. So that's why I'm trying to come at it from a public health perspective. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but when I started getting all of these intimacy related questions from men and women and people of all different, gender backgrounds who all look different. So you have students reaching out to me about their boyfriends. I have
Mm-hmm.
niqabis reaching out to me about pleasure their husbands. It was really eye opening to me, and it made me realize my own biases about my people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because Bangladesh has a population of 160 million people, so that's a lot of sex, right? And I think we
Yep.
shy away from this topic, but we're clearly doing it. And I think the most important thing is beyond just sex itself, we need to understand the changes that our bodies go through. Kids don't really know
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. I had an elderly woman reach out to me and she said, "Can you write about menopause?"
Wow.
And I thought, oh my goodness. I created the website, but this is a work in progress. And I hope that it's
Right.
not the only website that's going to be out there. I hope that more Bangladeshis are encouraged to talk about this. And I'm certainly
For
not the first
sure.
person. Yeah.
I think your anecdotes about the DMs that you receive speaks volumes to the impact of your work already and to the fact that there aren't any go-to sources for this kind of information for the Bangladeshi Bengali community. So already, I mean, within like less than a month, you're already starting these conversations and impacting these relationships and individuals one person at a time, which is awesome. Do you think that the conversation about sex ed starts at home or at school?
I think it starts at home, and I think it should
Mm-hmm.
start quite young. And when I say sex ed, I don't necessarily mean, you know, teaching your children how to have sex if that makes you uncomfortable, but we should
Mm-hmm.
definitely be teaching our children the difference between good touch and bad touch. Because one of the things that I've also
100%.
realized in my research, writing the Samiha Khan case, but also just the research
Mm-hmm.
I've done for most of my life, um, people don't understand when they've been abused, and when we're not talking to our kids about this is a way someone should approach you, this is the way someone would touch you. If we don't teach our
Mm-hmm.
kids the proper names for genitalia, how can they say, oh, this mama touched me here, or and how do we also equip parents to know how to respond to this sort of thing? Go to the
Mm-hmm.
authorities, offer mental health resources for your child because something terrible happened to them, right? And also
Right.
mental health resources for the parents, because if parents also
Mm-hmm.
blame themselves for bringing this person in, I'm sure they're also going through something. So I think it's integral for parents to start this conversation with their kids, and with boys and girls. In my personal experience, I know so many Bangladeshi men, unfortunately, who were sexually abused as kids. And the crazy
Mm-hmm.
aspect of that is that I feel like sometimes they're also forgotten because we're so worried about protecting our daughters that we forget that our sons can also be abused. So
Right.
regardless of your gender identity, we have to protect our kids. We have to protect ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
sex education is it's a lifelong lesson. And I'm still learning, and I hope everyone else they feel comfortable enough to continue to learn.
Right. Yeah, we're getting some comments in response to this question. Sansadul says, great question. Definitely not just one answer. Could start at school or at home. The safe environment is so crucial to facilitate that conversation. Yeah, 100%. I do agree. It's also interesting because at least in the last 2 3 years, maybe this is like kind of a bias that I've had, but I've noticed more headlines about so and so abused by a teacher, by like a private tutor, by their like brother-in-law, their own father, right? Like in the Samiha Khan case, which was here in Queens, and so how it almost feels like it's normalized almost, or like it's something that you see in a newspaper stand. It's like, oh, this happened again, but it doesn't. There doesn't seem to be enough next steps to be like, okay, what do we do to like prevent this from happening, at least in the Bangladesh context?
No, absolutely. And I think sometimes people, and you'll see this a lot in comments. I might be
Mm-hmm.
wrong, so I'll have to double check this, but I believe Bangladesh recently introduced the death penalty for rape cases,
Mm-hmm.
which some people think is a good thing, some people think is a bad thing. Um, I think that when we are not deterring rape in the first place, when we are not introducing conversations about consent, conversations about, what is appropriate, what's inappropriate, it's going to keep happening. And the fact that the
Mm-hmm.
cases are going up, I think it scares people, but at the same time, it means that people, especially women, they feel encouraged, they feel empowered to open up about it, right? So I think that's also a good thing with the spread of social media. People are afraid, but when you see, this young woman from a specific village, she's opened up about what happened to her. I mean, I'll never forget the different cases, that the high profile cases in Bangladesh. There was
Mm-hmm.
Tonu, who was raped in Kumilla. Then you
Mm-hmm.
had Nusrat Jahan Rafi. I think that happened in 2020 or 2019. And, her principal molested her. And
Right.
when she went to the police, the fact that people went to the streets to protest against her, in
Mm-hmm.
honor of the principal, and for her to only be lynched less than however long later. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it goes to show that people coming out is a good thing, and I hope that this conversation, it becomes normalized, it becomes destigmatized, and we have these convos with everybody.
Of course, I think it's really empowering to see people actually go to the streets and hold up signs and kind of start their own movement in Bangladesh around this, just so that I think those are like the necessary steps to at least bring more light to these issues and not make it oh, this happened again in Bangladesh. Um, so yeah, I think that's great. I've been doing some research on my own, and I saw that Bangladesh only recently introduced sex ed into like school curriculum, which I found really interesting. I haven't asked my parents, for example, where where they learned their sex ed from, before this initiative came to play. But I think it still feels like such a stigma. I mean, even for us in the diaspora, and everyone has their own relationship with their parents, but like it's such a stigma to even talk about, let's say, relationships in general, about dating in general. And it's like, how do you then go to the next step and talk about sex ed, or about proper consent and other things that relate to our bodies? It's such an awkward issue in the Bengali community.
Yeah, I think it also fosters unhealthy relationships because it fosters unhealthy relationships within ourselves, but also with our partners,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's strange because, the moment you're born, especially if you're a daughter, they'll say things like, "Oh, when are you going to get married?" But you
Mm-hmm.
cannot date, you can't have a boyfriend, you can't have a girlfriend. And what's interesting is, the this for boys, for example, you're expected to have a little bit of experience, but not too much. You're supposed to somehow know how to please a woman, but you don't know anything about a woman because you've never dated before. And I'm talking about
Mm-hmm.
people at least in Bangladesh, not necessarily here, but it still applies, right?
Yeah.
So you say all this stuff. You say that you cannot date, and then suddenly, once you turn 21 or 22, when are you going to get married? When are you
Yeah.
going to? And
It's such a huge jump.
yeah, and it's such an
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable place to be put in because what do you think they're going to do the first night? You want them to consummate the marriage, but if you're a virgin, you've never seen a penis before, you've never seen a vagina before, you don't know what to do, you don't understand intimacy. How do you make each other comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
So it's such an integral conversation to have, and we can't have these conversations with our parents, right? Because then they're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, she's dating. Oh my gosh, he has a girlfriend. I have to bring home a wife from Bangladesh. I have to rectify this somehow." So they'll do
Mm-hmm.
things like send the girl to Bangladesh so she could get forcefully married to somebody she doesn't know, which is terrible, especially if it's somebody much older. I mean, that's essentially pedophilia with license.
Yeah.
Or if you have a son, you're unhappy with his behavior, or he's having some mental health issues, and then you bring a wife from Bangladesh who's not going to ask any questions, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's not healthy for either person. Get your
For
children.
sure.
It's normal to date. So it's it's tough. It's tough because at the same time, Bangladesh is largely Muslim, so I'm aware. I know that we can't talk about dating before
Mm-hmm.
marriage, but there has to be a way to introduce these topics so that people are at least comfortable with their first night, or people are comfortable with their bodies and they understand what's going on and they're not afraid. There's so
Exactly.
much to learn. There's so much to learn.
I think, and you addressed a comment actually that someone just made of how does being Muslim and being holding on to Islamic beliefs affect sex education and premarital sex conversations. Um, Actually, it's interesting when I think about the subcontinent in general. I think sex is very much viewed as um, only for like procreation purposes, and in the context of a marriage. But beyond that, it's a very hush hush topic. And for the reasons for kind of procreation, a lot of pressure is put on the woman in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard. It's hard, but I think, just jumping back to the question about, being Muslim, I think, considering the number of Muslim women who've messaged me about their partners and about their husbands, I think that, it's obviously it's intimacy, right? If you want to be close
Mm-hmm.
to your partner, if you want to be close to your husband or wife, that's really important. And I think on top of that, sex education, or at least sexuality in Bangladesh, it's all really sort of exclusive to heterosexuality and
Mm-hmm.
marriage itself. So, not only is there taboo if you're unmarried and having sex, but there's taboo if you are, God forbid, if you're gay, and
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's still, there might be some laws still in place where sodomy is illegal. So, it's really hard to have these conversations. I mean, I've had some negative backlash, but the backlash that I received is really outweighed by the questions that I received. So I don't get
Mm-hmm.
to, I try to ignore it the best that I can.
Right. I also think it's difficult, at least as I'm imagining as a teenager, the kind of exposure that you do get if it's not from school. It if you're in a school, for example, that's like gender segregated, you can't casually have these conversations with, let's say, the a person of like a different gender than you. Which is when I think about it, like a lot of banter in my like middle school, high school days came from that, or even from movies. And I'm thinking of Bollywood movies as one medium to kind of learn about intimacy and kind of those relationships. And my parents always talk about this all the time of like old Bollywood movies were like much more like kind of distant. They didn't have like a lot of physical things going on, and now Bollywood has become so progressive and kind of open and has like more suggestive language and like sexual content. How do you think that affects how people in Bangladesh kind of view their own bodies and what parts they actually grab from that kind of media for their own sex education?
That's a good question. So I mean, I don't watch too much Bollywood. Like I remember as a kid, I watched Kabi Kushi Kabi Gum, and I remember what was the movie where Chaya Chaya was like super super big?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but I think the thing is, even in Bollywood movies, there are a lot of negative aspects to the way that they approach relationships, right? Because you'll have the guy,
Mm-hmm.
he's super duper creepy. I think, what was it? There was a
Mm-hmm.
movie recently. Oh, I watched Toilet the movie, really weird. I think it was on Netflix with Akshay Kumar
Okay.
and another young woman. And in the scene, he was just following her all day. And then she just finally gave in and was like, okay, I guess we'll get married. And then she
Yeah.
was mad because he didn't have a toilet in his house. I mean, it's I don't know if it's necessarily healthy. I mean, I haven't
Mm-hmm.
watched enough movies to discuss how it's affected Bangladesh as a whole. I mean, at the same time, I don't think there are any open sex scenes, which I don't know if I would suggest that because of what the community is like. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, I think I mean, it's still pretty. It's progressive, but considering how dangerous India still is for women, I don't think it's really made a lot of progress.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
for sure. 100%. Um, Kind of wanted to segue into kind of constructive measures that we can take to kind of start changing the dialogue as the generations go on. What are some concrete steps to kind of break the stigma and facilitate these conversations, whether it's amongst ourselves, like people in our own age group, or like with our parents and caregivers?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, we just need to communicate. I think that's the most important way. I think that's the best way to help destigmatize it. Parents need to talk to their kids. I know I'm a millennial, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
pretty open with my mom about certain things, but there's very clearly a sort of like a gap between what she knows and what I know. I mean, I remember when boys in school were talking about jerking off, I like told my mom, I was like, "What is that?" And she was just, "We can't talk about this," you know. Um, I don't know. I think the most important thing is just normalizing conversations, normalizing communication throughout all fronts. So if you have children, talking to them about good touch versus bad touch, talking to them about puberty. What happens to your body when you have puberty?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a young girl and you don't know what happens when you get your period for the first time, that's really scary. If you're a young boy and you start to grow several inches taller out of nowhere and you have a mustache, you're like, I don't know what's going on. Your parents should have those conversations with you. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you expect them to start becoming more sexually active, whether they are dating or whether they're waiting for marriage, you need to understand what sex is. You need to understand the changes that your body goes through. And then again, as you get older, menopause and how growing older also affects men and, regardless of what your gender is, your body changes. So I think regardless of what stage you are in life, sex education will affect you in some way. And
Mm-hmm.
then, we just have to facilitate these conversations. We have to have them at home, and then we also have to normalize them nationwide. So whether that's in school,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we have mental health professionals available. We have doctors and
Mm-hmm.
gynecologists and really open-minded doctors who are they'll take your questions, they'll answer them. I mean, there should really be no sense of shame, but there is, and that's one of the biggest problems. I think there's a lot of shame, and one woman that I interviewed for the Samiha Khan piece, Dr. Rumana Mansour, she said that shame isolates people, and that's really one of the biggest reasons why when something bad happens, when there's abuse, there aren't a lot of stories that come out. So I think now
Mm-hmm.
that more stories are coming out, that just means that people are feeling empowered. They're feeling comfortable. They are taking the narrative back. And I hope that these conversations deter rape. I hope that we talk about consent. I hope
Mm-hmm.
that women feel comfortable about their sexuality. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
have a clitoris for a reason. I hope that men are more comfortable in their bodies. I mean, I've gotten so many penis related questions in the past. My goodness, in the past month. And I quickly wrote an FAQ because of how many questions that I received. I remember this one young
Mm-hmm.
man messaged me. He emailed me. Well, several men messaged me and they said, "What position should I sleep with my wife so I can have a son?" And when I wrote, there's actually no way that you can do that. It's just it happened.
It's
And
50-50. Yeah.
yeah, he just wrote, "Oh," like he was so upset. So there's so many myths. There's so many myths, and
Mm-hmm.
and there's also another thing that I think people also forget. Sex work is legal in Bangladesh. So for that
Mm-hmm.
reason, I think it's one of the few Muslim countries where sex work is legal. So it
Mm-hmm.
also introduces like a certain layer of, okay, sex is bad, but here's this group of women that we're not going to give any rights to, we're not going to protect. But if you go to them and sleep with them, we'll just keep it hush hush, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a
Exactly.
few, yeah, they're not protected, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
what happens if you have an STD? Who do you go to? Would you know who to go to?
Mm-hmm.
I've had a few women reach out to me who believe they have STDs contracted from their partners, and it's really, really tough to have those conversations because now I'm telling people, or now I made sure to include on the website, with
Mm-hmm.
every new partner that you have, you should always get tested. If you should always wear a condom, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just you need to be mindful of your body. You need to go to the doctor. You need to keep up with your appointments. It's self-health, and this is why it's public health. It is a public health issue because
Mm-hmm.
when you have increases in cases of STDs and people are not going to the doctor because they're afraid of the shame, and then you have men who have so and so disorder or women becoming infertile because of sexually transmitted diseases, that is a
Mm-hmm.
public health issue, and we need to battle this. We need to combat this, and I think that
100%.
the change will definitely happen. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
Mm-hmm. I think as Bangladesh becomes more educated and kind of develops more, and at least with this new generation having access to sex ed built into the curriculum, we'll see maybe more knowledge, A, about like birth control, B, about STDs, C, about like family planning, and also hopefully, I think this happens outside of school, about like actual consent and like healthy interactions and what healthy dynamics between two people or love or marriage kind of look like.
I actually wanted to give a shout out to a couple of Instagram accounts. So people who are
Yes.
listening in or who'll listen to the podcast later. I know that I take pride in knowing that I created the first Bangladeshi website, but I'm not the first person to have this conversation. And in
Mm-hmm.
Bangladesh, there are communities or grassroots groups that are doing the work in the communities. I mean, they're in Bangladesh. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the accounts that I think everyone should follow is called at Bodol BD, so BODOLBD. The second one that I think is amazing, and you mentioned the protests in Bangladesh. This second group, they're the ones that actually help lead all of these protests. So I highly
Oh,
recommend that
wow.
everyone follows them. It's called Cholo Pothaboli. So at
Mm-hmm.
CHOLOKOTHABOLI. And then another local group that I love is Bengali Mental Health. So if you follow them,
Mm-hmm.
I know Bengalis of New York has highlighted them before. So I just wanted to give them quick shout outs because, especially specifically Bodol, BD, and Jolopohaboli, they're in Bangladesh. So, they deserve a lot of credit. And, I'm doing it
Mm-hmm.
here. This is different, and I understand the privilege that I have from
Mm-hmm.
doing some work like that, where I'm not, I'm in the Bangladeshi community, but I'm not in Bangladesh. So I'm aware of that privilege and, I want to give credit where it's due.
100%. And I think your position as someone who grew up here and having that distance from Bangladesh helps you actually become more aware of the kind of gap in the conversations around sex ed between you as a diaspora child here versus if you were a child who grew up in Bangladesh.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. I feel like we are unlucky in some ways, but also lucky in some ways, right? Because here, I mean, my parents were always really strict. I wasn't allowed to date. I did not really date until college. So not
Mm-hmm.
until like I didn't have my yeah, it was I was a late bloomer and like a lot of my girlfriends were and that was totally normal. Or
Yeah.
they either they were all secretly dating and they were all going through these things that they can't talk to people about. And that's hard. That's hard. Um
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I know the gap is there, but I hope that we could bridge that gap, right? Because those issues still exist in our communities here. And when that problem is happening here and it's happening back home, it's important to sort of eradicate it the best that we can. And there's so many people out there who are trying to bridge that gap, and it's really comforting to know that there's a lot of folks out there. So I recommend, social media can be a dark place. I'm sure I feel like when I'm on Instagram, I always think like, wow, I think I need lip fillers or Botox or a BBL, but please just follow mental health folks, follow artists,
Mm-hmm.
follow people who are doing good work to help their communities, and you'll realize the world is not so bad.
Yep, 100%. Couldn't agree with you more. Especially the past couple, 2, 3 years during COVID when everyone kind of has social media to interact with people. I wanted to transition to our last segment, which is kind of the future prospects of BD Sex Ed. What's kind of the next steps for you, or what you envision this project becoming?
That's a great question. I want to become the Dr. Ruth of Bangladesh. So if anybody knows who Dr. Ruth is, she's an incredible sexologist. She's a doctor. I don't know if I'm going to become a doctor. Maybe I could just call myself that. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
certainly interested in, going into higher education, maybe getting a degree in sexology, whatever the topic may be. I'm learning. I can speak Bangla. Bangla is my first language, so I was in ESL until the first grade. But
Mm-hmm.
I am learning to read and write Bangla. So my goal is to, by this time next year, know how to edit my own work. So, the way that I created it is I wrote everything in English because, that's what I can read. I used Google
Mm-hmm.
Translate as the first layer of edits, and then I used three different renders, family and friends, and more family and friends to ensure that the Bangla was correct. So, it's a work in progress. My ultimate goal is for this to become a huge. I want this to become sort of like my company. And maybe one day, my ultimate goal, and it's not just about me, my ultimate goal is that sex education becomes something so normal that people don't even bat their eyes at it anymore. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that people of Bangladesh can openly talk about sex, that they could talk about, you know, their intimate relationships. They can talk about the changes in their bodies without having so much, you know, lodjashorom. You know, you don't need to have that when it comes to your body. And it's
Mm-hmm.
a public health issue. So I hope that, you know, health departments in Bangladesh, they sort of normalize these conversations, and that, you know, when we see it coming from the top, it's going to happen at the bottom.
100%. It kind
Yeah,
of goes both ways. It has to kind of happen at home, with some support from up above as well. Kind of like a
absolutely.
two-way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Well, if anyone has any questions before we wrap up, thank you so much, Bushra, for really opening up this line of conversation. I feel like it's something that isn't isn't talked about at all, even like in our diaspora community.
No, absolutely.
I
Thank you, Nosheen, for having me.
Of course. Okay, so we have one question. Is there already existing work being done on body positivity for the Bengali community?
Can you repeat that?
Is there already existing work being done on body positivity for the Bengali community?
Definitely. Body positivity, I'm trying to think. I mean, there's so many Bangladeshi influencers out there already who talk about body positivity, or who talk about, I mean, I'm trying to think some people. So the
Mm-hmm.
accounts that I mentioned, they do touch base on that to some degree, or I've seen it before. I know Bodil has, I know Cholo Kohoboli has, but there are also a lot of Bangladeshi men and women who are out there who talk about their bodies. I know Nabila, she's like a
Mm-hmm.
huge influencer who's spoken about it. There's a woman named Tamanna from Australia, and she's super sex positive. So I love all of her content. She's based in
Mm-hmm.
Australia. Tamanna, the label. I know she's a creator. She's a designer. So she does incredible work. I mean, I know Shahana. Shahana, she just became the first Muslim Bangladeshi councilwoman. Really proud of
Mm-hmm.
her. But you know, she's openly discussed her past with lupus. So I think having more you know, Bangladeshi people in the spotlight who are willing to talk about, you know, their experiences and their bodies, you know, that definitely is body positivity. And I see it becoming more normal, and I love that. And oh, I think there's one model in Bangladesh who is pretty famous, Sobia. Um,
Ah, I was thinking of her and I was
yeah,
trying to
so
remember her handle.
Sobia,
Yeah.
and it's so
Mm-hmm.
funny because her mom and my mom used to work together. They both worked for Biman Airlines. Yeah,
Small world.
yeah,
Whoa.
yeah. But she's a rock star. So you know, I
100%.
think, and you know, I know I only mentioned women, but I know that the change with body positivity, it exists in the male community with amongst men. I'm sorry if I can't think of any male influencers off the top of my mind, but I know those conversations are happening, and I hope that they continue to
Mm-hmm.
happen, because you know, it's mental health affects everybody, and it's important to talk about.
Big time.
Yeah,
And sex ed affects all parts of our lives from youth all the way until we die. So really hope that
absolutely.
this kind of conversation really opens up by the time we have kids, our generation has kids and beyond. So, and hopefully you get to see the kind of fruits of your work in your lifetime
I hope so. I
or
will.
sooner.
Will. We'll
Yeah,
see. We'll see it. We're making
100%.
changes in a good way.
Yeah, big
But
time.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. We are going to publish this podcast and it'll be available on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, etc. So sit tight for a few weeks. But thank you so much, Bushra, for kind of kicking off this Sex and Dash series at Boney. And we'll have more conversations like these in the future.
Awesome. Take care and stay safe.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
bye. Take care.
Bye.